3 days before Thanksgiving, while the rest of the country was buying turkeys and cleaning guest rooms, I was in my study staring at a document that made my hands shake. Not from age, but disbelief. It wasn't a scam email or a random draft. It was a detailed spreadsheet titled Dad's Speech Final Version. The file had timestamps, talking points, even audience reactions in parentheses. And right there, under closing joke, my own son had written a line that would have turned the entire dinner into a spectacle. About me, my business, and a loan he clearly thought I'd forgotten about. But I hadn't. In fact, the transfer was sitting right there in my bank archive. $47,000 wired on April 12, 2021. That's when I realized this wasn't just a joke. It was a plan. And I was about to find out how far he'd gone to make me the punchline. I didn't move for a full minute. The glow from the monitor made the room feel colder than it was, bouncing off the framed certificates on the wall, the same ones I'd worked 30 years for. The cursor blinked next to his words like it was taunting me. Don't take yourself too seriously, Dad. He'd written it in parentheses as if it were a note to himself. My son Michael was 32. He'd been telling everyone he was starting a podcast, something about breaking family systems. I didn't take it seriously, until now. The spreadsheet had guest lists, microphone placements, timestamps for camera angles, and a column titled Reactions. Under mine, he'd written, Laughs awkwardly. I scrolled further. There was a folder with drafts of my old business contracts he had no reason to have. Some were scanned copies I hadn't seen since before the divorce. He'd accessed my old Dropbox. That realization came slow, like a frost creeping across glass. I had given him that password when he was helping with tax files 2 years ago. I leaned back in the chair, remembering the last time we spoke without tension. July, his birthday dinner. He ordered whiskey I paid for, toasted to accountability, and joked about how old men like me still believed loyalty was a virtue. That night I thought he was being philosophical. Now I knew it was rehearsal. My office smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. The hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound between me and the truth forming in front of me. My own son had been collecting receipts. By morning, I had printed everything, 84 pages, single-sided, and laid them on the dining table. I marked each with sticky notes, blue for financials, yellow for personal correspondence, red for potential defamation. Years in corporate taught me one thing: paper protects you when people don't. I made coffee, black, no sugar, the way I always did when I needed clarity. My hands were steady now. I opened my email and typed data extraction authorization. My IT consultant, Rob, owed me a favor. I attached a screenshot of the file path and asked him to check server logs. Discretion required. He replied in 7 minutes. Access from external IP traced to your son's laptop. 2 logins last week. There it was, confirmation. My own blood had been inside my accounts days before a national holiday built on gratitude. That afternoon I drove to the storage unit where I kept old ledgers and tax boxes. The clerk recognized me. I'd been renting that space since 2004. Inside it smelled like dust and cardboard. I found the old partnership agreement with my late father's hardware company, Michael's inheritance line untouched since the divorce. That document alone represented nearly $480,000 in assets. If he wanted to humiliate me publicly, he'd do it at a table financed by the man he was mocking. I sat on a crate reading that clause again. Ownership transfer upon demonstration of ethical stewardship. I had written those words myself at 45, never imagining I'd use them against my own child. At home, my phone buzzed with a message from him. Hey, Dad, can you bring the old photo albums on Thursday? We're doing a family segment. A family segment. That's what he called it. I typed back, sure, and left it at that. Then I opened my safe. Inside were 2 flash drives, one labeled Company A, another Michael. I hadn't touched the second in years. On it were voice memos, drafts of our early business meetings when he was still learning. I played one. His voice was younger, hopeful. You can count on me, Dad. I stopped the playback halfway through. The irony stung more than betrayal itself. That night I went through his public podcast page. Episode teasers, all clean, all professional. But the scheduled one for Thanksgiving, Breaking the Patriarch, had a blurred thumbnail of me at a company barbecue. I clicked Inspect Element on the page source and found the upload tag. Scheduled 11:25 8 p.m. He planned to premiere it during our dinner. Clever, calculated, cruel. The next morning I called my attorney, Daniels. He'd represented me through 2 audits. He knew how to move quietly. I sent him the spreadsheet and the screenshots. His reply was simple. Defamation pre-notification under Section 230. We can freeze the release if we prove intent. I told him we'd prove more than intent. I wanted to make sure that legally and financially, any public humiliation would ricochet straight back. We scheduled a meeting for 9 a.m. Wednesday, one day before Thanksgiving. When I hung up, I walked through the house, slowly, deliberately. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. My ex-wife's recipe cards were still in the drawer. Every detail of that home was built by years of working double shifts, by paying off loans, by giving my son a life with no scarcity. I paused at the hallway mirror and studied my reflection. 61 years old, gray at the temples, steady posture. People said I looked strict. I wasn't strict. I was consistent. And consistency doesn't earn applause. It earns resentment from those who confuse love with leniency. By Tuesday night, the plan was clear. Daniels would file the cease and desist draft at 8 a.m., attach the IP evidence, and copy the hosting platform's legal address. I would deliver a physical notice myself to his apartment. I printed 2 copies, slipped them into a brown envelope, and added 1 more page, my handwritten note. Humiliation doesn't make a man powerful. Accountability does. At 7:12 a.m. Wednesday, I parked across from his building. The morning air smelled of wet concrete and cold metal from the heating vents. I watched as he came out carrying camera gear and a tripod. He didn't see me. He laughed into his phone, said something about capturing the reaction in real time. I stepped out, walked up to him, and handed over the envelope. He looked at me, confused, maybe a little nervous. "What's this?" he asked. "Documentation," I said. "Open it before dinner." He smirked, shrugged, and walked away. That was fine, because by the time he opened it, Daniels would already have sent the digital notice and the hosting platform's legal team would have received the official freeze. It wasn't revenge yet. It was containment. The kind that keeps reputations from bleeding before the incision heals. At exactly 9:03 a.m., I received Daniels' confirmation email. Notice served. Host compliance pending. Attached was a PDF-stamped preliminary injunction request. Title 47, Section 230, Safe Harbor. I read it twice, once as a father and once as a man who'd spent a lifetime signing things that determined whether people kept or lost their jobs. The difference this time was that the signature wasn't protecting a company. It was protecting my name. Then came the text I'd been expecting. Not from my lawyer, but from my sister, who had always tried to play the mediator. "Michael says you're threatening him legally. It's Thanksgiving. Don't make it ugly." That line, "don't make it ugly," made me laugh out loud in the empty house, as if humiliation in front of a live audience wasn't ugly enough. I didn't reply. I forwarded her message to Daniels. He said, "Standard. They'll start guilt campaigning. Stay factual." So I did. I pulled up my bank's archive, printed the $47,000 transfer receipt, and highlighted the notation, "Temporary business seed loan." He'd told me he'd pay me back once the podcast got traction. 2 years later, traction looked like mockery. Around noon, I drove to the local courthouse. The hallways smelled like old paper and bleach, a scent I'd come to associate with closure. Daniels met me on the steps holding a thin folder. "They'll freeze the content by 5 p.m., he said. "If he tries to upload anywhere else, we can trace IP replication. You can also serve him with a financial notice, revoking partnership in the trust." I nodded. "Do it." He looked at me carefully. "You're calm about this," I said, "because I already buried the emotional part last night. On my way home, traffic was thick. Every radio station was running holiday ads about family, warmth, forgiveness. I turned them off. The silence felt clean. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a box on the porch addressed from Michael. Inside, a set of matching aprons embroidered with "The Thompsons, Unfiltered." There was a note, "Wear this at dinner." "It'll make sense." My stomach tightened. He'd already planned every second. The apron was a prop. I folded it carefully, put it in the trash, and called my accountant, Miller. "How fast can we separate the remaining trust holdings?" He asked, "What's the reason?" I said, "Public exposure risk." He sighed, typed, and said, "Done in 48 hours. But I'll need a notarized authorization." I told him he'd have it by end of day. That night, I sat at the dining table, same spot where my father once taught me to balance ledgers by hand. I opened a new document titled Legacy Adjustment 2024. In calm, deliberate sentences, I rewrote my will. The family business shares, once destined for Michael, would go to the Community College Scholarship Fund. The house would remain under my control until death, then pass to a veterans organization. The rest divided among nieces and nephews. It wasn't punishment. It was reallocation. Consequence doesn't need to scream. It just needs a signature and a witness. I signed it, sealed it, and called my neighbor, Carol, a retired notary. She came over in slippers, signed the witness line, and said softly, "He'll regret this someday." I said, "That's not my goal. My goal is that I don't." Wednesday evening, I drove to the hotel where our family usually gathered before big holidays. Michael's car was there, same license plate, same dent from the ski trip I paid for. Through the glass doors, I saw him setting up lights near the banquet table, laughing with a couple of friends from his production crew. They were attaching small lapel mics to chairs. One chair, mine, had a camera directly facing it. Professional grade with a live feed indicator flashing red. He was planning to stream it. Not just record, stream. I felt a quiet click inside my head, the kind that precedes irreversible motion. I walked in, calm, carrying a single briefcase. His friends stopped when they saw me. "Hey, Mr. Thompson," one said awkwardly. Michael turned, surprised but not guilty. "Dad, you're early," he said, smiling like a host greeting a guest, not a son greeting a father. I looked around the room. "Testing your angles?" I asked. He laughed. "Just making sure it looks natural." I said, "Nothing about this is natural." I opened the briefcase, took out the court document, and placed it on the table between us. "This," I said quietly, "is an injunction. Any broadcast containing my name, image, or likeness without consent violates it." He frowned. "You're joking." "No, you've got until 5 p.m. to cancel your upload. After that, your hosting platform will comply with the order. Every mirrored link will be traced. Every sponsor contacted." His jaw tightened. "You're trying to destroy my career." I said, "I'm stopping you from destroying my reputation." The room was still. His friends shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something about getting coffee and slipped out. Michael stared at the papers. "You really think people care about your old money, Dad?" "The world's changed," I said. "Integrity hasn't." Then I turned, walked out, and left him standing under those bright lights that suddenly looked too harsh, too revealing. Back home, I poured a glass of water, sat in the quiet, and watched the digital clock tick toward 5. At 5:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Daniels, upload canceled. Host acknowledged injunction. Backup links flagged." Beneath that, a screenshot from the hosting admin. "Content removed for pending legal review." I exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale that feels like closing a heavy door after a storm. But it wasn't over. At 6:42, my sister called again. "He's furious," she said. "He says you ambushed him." I said, "He invited me to dinner. I just brought documentation." She hesitated. "He's saying he'll tell everyone you disinherited him." I smiled faintly. "Good, let him. Maybe someone will finally believe him." Thanksgiving morning came quiet. No calls, no visits. Just the sound of rain tapping against the windows. I made coffee, scrambled eggs, ate alone at the table. The plate across from me stayed empty. I didn't feel regret, only a strange kind of peace that comes when the noise stops. Then my phone lit up with a notification from my bank. Transfer confirmed, $480,000 trust reallocation. One final line of separation. By noon, the radio announced traffic delays and turkey shortages. I turned it off, walked to my office, and opened my email. One unread message. From Michael. Subject line, "You win." The body was blank except for one attachment, an image of the old family photo from the barbecue, same one he used for his thumbnail. Only this time the caption read, "Maybe I needed to remember who taught me everything I know." I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was sarcasm or surrender. Maybe both. Still, I replied, "Thank you for removing the video. The door isn't closed, but the locks are changed." Then I archived the thread. Outside, the rain slowed. The world felt smaller, cleaner. I opened the window, let the cold air in, and realized something I'd known all along but never named. Revenge isn't loud. It's silent paperwork, timestamps, and a steady pen stroke. It's the act of restoring your name to your own hands. That night I didn't sleep. The house had that kind of deep silence that lets every sound grow teeth. The tick of the baseboard heater, the low hum of the fridge, the creak from the stairs that only old wood and old guilt make. Around 2 a.m. I sat in my office again, screen light sharp on my face, scrolling through everything one more time. Emails, drafts, timestamps. I wasn't angry anymore. I was cataloging, the same way I'd cataloged inventory back when I managed 40 employees and 3 warehouses. Methodical, deliberate. Every lie my son had told had a date, a file path, a traceable location. That made it manageable. When you can quantify betrayal, you can contain it. By 3 a.m. I had a clean folder named Michael Legal. It had subfolders: access, evidence, witness, response. Each one was color-coded. It looked professional, almost beautiful in its precision. At dawn, I brewed coffee and looked out over the backyard. The trees were bare, branches black against the gray sky. Somewhere across town he was probably still asleep, confident that his plan was moving along perfectly. I thought about when he was 10, how he used to follow me into the garage and hand me tools when I worked on the car. He'd learned early that silence meant focus. I missed that version of him, the one who wanted to understand, not perform. I set my mug down, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old metal flash drive shaped like a key. I hadn't used it in years, but it contained voice memos from meetings with investors, recordings of my father's last advice before he died. I plugged it in and copied one folder labeled Legacy. A phrase my father had said echoed as I read the file names. You don't defend legacy with speeches. You defend it with records. By 8 a.m. the phone rang. Daniels again. Good morning, he said, voice even. We got preliminary acknowledgement from the hosting platform. They'll suspend the stream pending review. I exhaled through my nose. And what about derivative uploads? He replied, already flagged. If he tries to post a clip, their algorithm will catch it. He paused. Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, are you sure you don't want to reach out personally? You still have a window to fix this quietly. I said, quiet doesn't work when someone's rehearsing your downfall for views. I left the office around 9 and drove to the hardware store my father founded, the one I still owned shares in, but rarely visited. The sign out front was faded, the red paint chipped. Inside, the scent of oil, dust, and metal filled my lungs with memory. The manager, old Pete, looked up. Didn't expect to see you before the holiday, he said. Just needed some boxes, I answered. I walked to aisle 7, grabbed a few sturdy ones, but what I really came for was the feeling of those aisles. The slow honesty of shelves that only tell the truth. Either they're stocked or they're not. I lingered there for almost 20 minutes thinking. When I left, I drove past the elementary school where Michael once played baseball. The bleachers were empty, but I remembered him running the bases, looking up at me for approval. Somewhere between those bleachers and this spreadsheet, something had broken that I'd never noticed cracking. Back home, I opened my safe again, pulled out the thin manila envelope that contained the deed to this house. My name alone on every page. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. I realized that everything I'd ever built had a paper trail, but emotional investments never did. That's why they hurt longer. They're undocumented. I decided I'd change that too. I opened a new Word document titled Statement of Record, November 21st. I started typing as if writing to a future reader, maybe a court, maybe myself. I did not provoke this. I only responded with structure. The words flowed faster than I expected. I wrote down every relevant date. April 12th, 2021, loan. July 8th, 2022, first accountability joke. November 23rd, 2023, access log. I described the documents, attached screenshots, signed digitally. It wasn't a confession. It was protection. Around noon, Carol from next door knocked, holding a casserole dish. Thought you might not be cooking much this year, she said gently. She was in her 70s, always too kind for her own good. I invited her in for coffee. She looked at the piles of folders and smiled sadly. You doing your accounting again? Something like that, I said. She shook her head. You know, my son stopped speaking to me for 5 years. Then one day he showed up with a grandchild I didn't know I had. People come back different, sometimes better. I wanted to believe her, but belief had an expiration date and mine was past due. When she left, I sat back down and reread my typed statement. It felt solid. At 2:15 p.m., I received a new email from Rob, the IT consultant. Subject, security note, multiple transfers attempted. My pulse tightened. The body of the message read, 2 unauthorized login attempts from Michael's IP, targeting financial documents synced to cloud. Both blocked. He attached the log. The timestamps, 11:59 a.m., 12:02 p.m., showed he was still trying to get in. I forwarded the email to Daniels immediately, then called the bank's fraud department. The operator verified my identity and locked all online access. "Do you want to report this as internal family fraud?" she asked. The words tasted bitter. "Not yet," I said. "Just make sure no more doors are open." By evening, the gray sky had turned copper. I sat outside on the porch with a legal pad, writing by hand for the first time in months. The act of putting pen to paper slowed my heartbeat. I made a list of everything that was mine: the house, the store shares, the trust fund, my dignity. I drew a line through shared holidays. That one was gone. Around 6, I lit the outdoor heater and poured a glass of bourbon. Not celebration, not comfort, just ritual. Across the street, kids were playing football, shouting. Their laughter echoed down the block. Somewhere, maybe just a few miles away, my son was editing what remained of his special, trying to salvage a storyline without a father to humiliate. I wondered if he'd ever realize that his audience would forget him in days. But the legal mark on his record could last decades. Before midnight, I sent one more message to Daniels. If he continues attempts, proceed with family fraud claim. Include digital evidence. He replied instantly, "Understood." I closed my laptop and looked around the dark living room. The only light came from the small lamp near my father's old armchair. I sat in it, hands folded, and whispered to the empty room, "You'd have handled it the same way." The truth is, he probably would have handled it colder. The clock hit 12:03 a.m. Thanksgiving Day. I looked out at the wet street, the faint reflection of holiday lights in puddles, and realized that this was the real turning point. Not the legal filings or the screenshots, but the moment I stopped expecting him to apologize. Expectation is the final chain. When it breaks, all that's left is clarity. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and windless, a day that should have smelled like roasted turkey and nutmeg, but instead carried only the scent of cold rain and printer toner. I'd been awake since 5, pacing between the kitchen and the office. The documents were already filed, the accounts locked, the trust reallocated. Legally, I'd done everything right. Emotionally, it still felt like standing in the middle of a house fire after the flames were gone, the air thick with what used to be. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, the same one Michael painted for me in 3rd grade. A faded inscription on the side read, "World's Best Dad." The irony wasn't lost on me. I held it anyway. The handle was cracked, but it hadn't broken off. At 7:30, I got a text from Daniels. Platform compliance complete. No public uploads detected.
Case in review. I responded with a simple thank you. Then I turned on the local news, a reporter talking about gratitude and family forgiveness.
Behind her, the anchor laughed too loudly. I muted the sound. Gratitude was easy when no one was filming your downfall. I sat back, watching the silent image flicker across the screen, and realized I didn't miss the noise. For the first time in years, I didn't have to perform patience or hide exhaustion. By 9, the phone rang again. Not a number I recognized. When I answered, it was Michael's production assistant, nervous and apologetic. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry for all this. I didn't know what he was planning. I thought it was just a family story thing." Her voice trembled. "He told us you'd already agreed." I said evenly, "That's why people ask for signatures." She hesitated. "He's been quiet since yesterday. Canceled the shoot. Said he needs space." I almost laughed. Space was all he'd ever had. "If he wants to talk," I said, "he knows my address. But tell him I won't meet him with cameras again." After the call, I walked outside. The neighborhood was still, except for a few cars heading toward relatives' houses. I noticed the leaves stuck to the pavement, the gutters overflowing with water, and thought about how small the world becomes when you strip it of noise. Inside, the clock ticked toward noon. I put on a clean shirt, poured myself another cup of coffee, and set a single place at the table. I'd cooked something simple, a roast chicken instead of turkey. The smell filled the house, warm and grounding. I sat down, knife in hand, and said the same quiet words my father always did before meals. Earn what you eat, keep what you earn. Halfway through lunch, my phone buzzed again. This time a video message from Michael. I let it play without sound first, just to prepare myself. Then I unmuted. He was in his apartment, dark circles under his eyes, the microphone off camera but still visible. An ironic confession. "Dad," he started, "I didn't mean for it to go that far. It was supposed to be satire. Everyone does exaggerated bits now. I thought if people saw how strict you were, they'd relate to me. But I didn't think about what that would cost you." He paused, looking away. "I've taken it all down, everything, sponsors, clips, the drive. It's gone." He looked back into the lens. "You can hate me. I get it, but I learned something this week. You built everything on paper and proof. I built everything on noise, and noise disappears faster." I sat there watching, unsure what to feel. The words sounded genuine, but sincerity without accountability is just performance in softer lighting. I didn't reply. Instead, I downloaded the video, archived it into the evidence folder, and renamed it Final Statement MP4. Not out of malice, out of consistency. Documentation never lies. Around 3, Daniels called again. "Good news," he said. "They've issued a written compliance statement. You're in the clear. He can't post without violating federal notice," I said. "I'm not worried about posting anymore." There was a pause. "You did the right thing, you know." I looked out the window at the rain starting again. "The right thing never feels right when it's personal," I said. The rest of the day passed slowly. I cleaned the house, stacked the folders neatly into a storage box labeled 2023, resolved. Then I walked into the garage and found one of Michael's old baseball gloves. The leather cracked and stiff. I sat on the workbench holding it, remembering how he used to wave at me from second base, waiting for me to watch him. I whispered, I was watching, you just stopped looking back." I left the glove there beside the toolbox and turned off the light. As evening fell, I went for a drive. The streets were almost empty, lights glowing faintly through the drizzle. Passing the diner we used to go to after his games, I saw families inside. Laughter, movement, warmth. It didn't make me bitter. It just made me aware of distance, of the quiet kind of loss that doesn't demand sympathy. I parked near the old river bridge and stepped out. The water was black and slow, reflecting faint ripples of orange from the street lamps. I took out my phone and opened a new note. The cursor blinked on the screen. I typed, "If legacy is the sum of our choices, mine is to end the cycle of humiliation, not continue it." I saved it, locked the phone, and stood there until the cold settled in my bones. When I returned home, it was almost midnight. The heater hummed softly. I poured the last of the bourbon and sat in my father's chair again. The house didn't feel empty. It felt intact, sealed, like something repaired but still showing its seams. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop one last time and drafted an email to Daniels and Miller. Finalize transfers. No further action against Michael unless provoked. Case closed. I hit send at 12:07 a.m. A notification popped up. Another message from Michael, just text this time. "You were right about records. I've started deleting everything that isn't real. Don't respond. Just know I'm done performing." I stared at the words for a while, then turned off the screen. Some messages don't need replies. They just need time to sink. I went upstairs, left the door slightly open, and listened to the rain ease off outside. For the first time in months, I felt my breathing slow into something peaceful, something earned. Revenge, I realized, isn't about damage. It's about alignment, setting the truth back to where it should have been all along. Paper against noise, proof against spin, silence against spectacle. And as I turned off the lamp, I knew that in the morning, when the world started moving again, my story wouldn't be one of humiliation. It would be one of correction. Quiet, clean, irreversible. At 5:41 p.m., the clouds over the neighborhood turned the same dull brass color they always did right before it snowed. I sat at the window with the light off, so the glass became a mirror. In it, I could see my own reflection more than the street. I looked like the photographs in my office, same pressed shirt, same neutral mouth. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't relieved. I was simply awake in a different way, like a man who stepped back from a cliff and is still hearing the echo of his own footsteps. The injunction, the calls, the documentation, those were control mechanisms. What remained now was the hollow quiet that follows when you stop fighting noise. The email inbox was still open on my laptop. A message blinked from Miller. Transfer paperwork finalized. Trust accounts fully separated. I clicked it, scrolled through the attached PDFs, and saw the new column of beneficiaries. My name, the college fund, the veterans program. No, Michael. The act of reading it was stranger than signing it. I'd spent 2 decades imagining that everything I earned would end up in his hands, and now the record said otherwise. I closed the file and walked to the back hallway where the framed photos hung. School graduations, the day he got his first car, the last family Christmas before his mother left. I took them down one by one and stacked them face down on the sideboard. It wasn't an act of erasure, just a pause. Sometimes you have to remove an image to understand the event beneath it. Around 6:30, there was a knock. When I opened the door, it wasn't Michael. It was my sister, coat still wet from rain, holding a grocery bag. I brought pie, she said, trying to sound cheerful. You shouldn't be alone today. I let her in. The smell of apples filled the air. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 people from the same bloodline who had run out of neutral topics years ago. Finally, she said, "He called me last night. He's scared."
He says you're cutting him off. I nodded.
I'm not cutting him off. I'm just closing a loop, she frowned. You were always so precise with words. I smiled a little. Precision is cheaper than regret. She didn't laugh. She reached across the table and touched my hand. He made a mistake. I said, so did I. I thought I could buy his respect with opportunity. She stayed half an hour, left the pie on the counter, and kissed my cheek before going. I stood by the door until her car disappeared down the street. Then I looked at the pie, golden crust neatly vented, and thought of how traditions persist even when the people behind them don't. I cut one small slice, tasted it, then wrapped the rest and put it in the freezer. Maybe one day I'd share it with him again, maybe not. At 8 p.m. my phone rang. This time it was Michael. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Dad? His voice was cautious, almost formal. I'm not calling to argue. Can we meet somewhere public? I need to explain something face to face, and I said, if it's about reversing what's been filed, there's nothing to discuss. No, he said quickly. It's not that. I just want you to see the version of the project I actually built. It's not what you think. I considered. Daniel's notice was airtight, and curiosity, I told myself, wasn't weakness. Tomorrow morning, I said. 8 o'clock. The diner by the highway. No cameras. He agreed instantly, almost with relief. The night stretched long after that. I couldn't sleep, so I went out to the garage again, turned on the small radio and sanded an old piece of wood just to hear a sound I could control. I thought about the years we'd spent building the family brand, about how easily identity can become a currency for other people's ambitions. Around midnight, I wrote in my notebook, control without compassion breeds obedience, not loyalty. Compassion without control breeds chaos. Somewhere between those lines was where I had lost my son. The next morning, the roads were slick, but the diner parking lot was almost empty. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried batter. I sat in a booth facing the window. He came in wearing a black hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low. No crew, no camera bag. He looked older than 32. When he sat down, he didn't reach for his phone. Thanks for coming, he said quietly. I nodded. You have 5 minutes. He took a deep breath. The episode wasn't about humiliating you. It was supposed to be about rebuilding. The title was bait. I admit that, but the story was about how we fix family pride. I wanted to prove I could face you publicly. I watched him carefully. You accessed my accounts, Michael. You took private records, he winced. I needed the details right. I didn't want to lie. I leaned forward. You don't take what isn't yours to tell the truth. You ask. He slid a small flash drive across the table. It's all the raw footage. You can delete it. I already canceled the sponsors. I didn't touch it. And what do you want from me? Just to know if you hate me, he said. The question hung in the air. I looked out the window at the wet asphalt at a truck rolling by and answered slowly. Hate is energy I'd rather invest elsewhere. He swallowed hard. So that's it? That's it for now. We sat there in silence for a while, the kind that isn't entirely uncomfortable but isn't healing either. When the waitress brought the check, I reached for it. He tried to stop me. I said, "You can pay me back another way." "How?" he asked. "By learning how to speak without turning every sentence into content." I stood, left cash on the table, and walked out. Outside, the air smelled like snow again. He followed me to the car. "Dad," he said, "if I ever try to do something like this again, you have my permission to destroy everything I own." I looked at him, really looked, and said, "That's not permission I need." Then I got in the car and drove home. When I returned, the sun was just breaking through the clouds. Light caught the edges of the stacked folders on my desk, turning them gold for a moment before fading. I picked up the flash drive he'd given me, turned it over in my fingers, then set it in the drawer beside my father's pocket knife. Proof doesn't always need to be opened. Sometimes it just needs to exist. By evening, I'd written a short statement for Daniels to keep on file. All personal conflict resolved through private mediation. No further claims expected. I read it twice, signed, and sent it. Then I went outside and shoveled the thin layer of snow that had fallen. The air was crisp, the neighborhood silent. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for an alert, a ping, a notification. The world had gone analog again. Real sound, real air, real work. Inside, I poured tea instead of bourbon. I turned off the phone, sat down at the dining table, and looked at the single empty chair across from me. I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance. Maybe that's what victory really is at my age. Not applause, not revenge, just the absence of imbalance. I thought about calling him, but I didn't. Some lessons only stay learned in silence. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the driveway, erasing footprints, rewriting the landscape in calm handwriting. The kind that only nature knows how to write. When I woke the next morning, sunlight had finally broken through the week-long gray. It came in a clean line across the bedroom floor, catching the edge of the chair where I'd left my jacket. The house smelled faintly of old coffee and cedar from the drawers. I moved slower that day, not because of age, but because the tension that had kept me upright for weeks was gone. There was no emergency to answer, no hearing to schedule, no notice to file. The fight had ended quietly, which is the only way real fights ever end. On paper, not in noise. Downstairs, the answering machine's red light blinked. A message from Daniels. "Morning. Court confirmed closure of the injunction. File archived under voluntary resolution. If anything changes, we reopen within 90 days. I listened twice, then deleted it. Another message from Miller. Tax adjustment approved. New allocations already in motion. The bureaucracy of peace, I thought. I poured a cup of tea instead of coffee and opened the blinds. The snow had stopped. The street looked almost staged. Clean driveways, smoke curling from chimneys, a dog walker moving slow. Normalcy returning, indifferent to the storm that had passed inside one house. Around 10, I opened the laptop again, not to check mail, but to read the document labeled Statement of Record. The lines looked clinical now, but between them I saw the story of a man who'd finally refused to be rewritten. I added one last paragraph. Legacy is not what you leave them. It's what they can no longer take from you. Then I printed the file, signed it, and slid it into the metal lockbox with the rest. The sound of the latch closing was final and precise, like the click of a well-made door. At noon, the doorbell rang. A courier, young guy with tired eyes, held out an envelope. Delivery for Mr. Thompson, hand signature required. I signed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note in Michael's handwriting, not printed, not typed. I know you don't trust apologies on screens. This is in ink. I'm starting something new without using your name. You were right. I confused exposure with success. I'm sorry for every file I opened that wasn't mine. Beneath the words was a small Polaroid. Him standing outside the old hardware store, the closed sign behind him, smiling faintly. No caption, no date, just image and silence. I placed the note on the desk beside the mug he'd made in 3rd grade. The crack in the handle caught the light. I didn't call him. There was nothing to add. The moment had said enough. Instead, I went out to the garage, started the truck, and drove toward the outskirts of town. The sky was so bright it hurt to look at. The roads were slick but familiar. I stopped at the hill overlooking the river, our old fishing spot, and sat in the cab with the engine off. For a long time, I didn't think about law or legacy or failure. I thought about the sound of a line hitting water, the way silence between father and son used to mean comfort, not absence. After a while, I took out my phone and recorded a short memo. Not for him, not for anyone. Just for the record, November 26th. No further conflict. Peace achieved. Lessons recorded. Case closed. I saved it, then deleted the copy from the cloud. Some records are safer offline. When I drove back into town, the sun had started to lower behind the trees. The hardware store's sign had been cleaned. Through the window, I could see Pete reorganizing shelves. Life continuing. I parked and went inside. He looked up, surprised. "You back in business?" he asked. I smiled. "Just visiting old investments. I bought a small tool set, nothing I needed, just something to hold that wasn't paperwork." Before leaving, I told him, "Keep the place running another year. I'll cover the insurance myself." He nodded. "Your father would like that." On the drive home, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. The urge to monitor, to verify, was gone. The world could move without me tracking it. At a red light, I looked over at a billboard advertising family therapy. Bright colors and slogans about reconciliation. It didn't irritate me the way it might have a month ago. Some people need noise to find quiet. I had done it in reverse. That evening, I cooked a small dinner, pasta, nothing complicated. I set 2 plates out of habit, then put one back in the cupboard. Old patterns don't vanish, they fade. I ate slowly, each bite measured, the kind of ordinary meal that feels like a privilege when life has been chaos. After, I poured myself a glass of water, not bourbon, and stood at the window watching the snow melt into thin streams along the curb. Before bed, I opened the safe once more, checked the folders, and then pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I wrote a final note in steady handwriting. In the end, silence was the loudest protection. I folded it, slid it into the front of the lockbox, and turned the key. The click echoed softly through the room. Upstairs, the clock ticked toward midnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone face down, lights off. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to defend. It just existed, quiet, balanced mine. And in that dark stillness, with the house breathing around me, I understood what my father meant when he said that dignity isn't inherited. It's maintained. The snow outside had turned to mist, wrapping the streetlights in halos. I watched them until my eyes blurred, then lay back and let the stillness settle. 3 weeks passed before I heard his voice again. December had come early that year. The mornings were silver, the kind of cold that makes the glass sweat before sunrise. I was back to my old schedule, waking at 6, reading the paper, checking the markets, answering no one. The house had become an echo chamber of order. Every paper was where it belonged, every drawer closed, every bill paid. Quiet, predictable. That was the rhythm I trusted. But peace, I was learning, has a sound too. Not silence exactly, but the hum of things staying where they should. It was a Tuesday when the call came. Unknown number, local area code. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me pick up. "Dad?" His voice was softer, slower, as if he was measuring the word before letting it go. "I'm at the store." "Pete said you told him to keep it open."
"Can I come by?"
I didn't answer immediately. The silence on my end stretched long enough that I could hear him exhale. "I won't stay long," he added quickly. I said 10 minutes. "No cameras." "None," he promised. When he arrived, he stood at the threshold like a man entering a church he didn't believe in but still respected. He had a new haircut, shorter, cleaner. The nervous showman I'd known had been replaced by someone quieter, uncertain but grounded. He carried no phone, no laptop, just a folder. I gestured to the kitchen table. He sat, didn't touch the coffee I poured. "I wanted to give you this," he said, sliding the folder toward me. Inside was a business registration form, state-sealed, with his name under a new company, Thompson Media Restoration LLC. The line beneath read, "Independent Consulting, no affiliates." He said, "I'm using what I know to fix what others broke. Old families with bad press, people who need help cleaning up. I guess I learned it from you." I studied the papers. Everything was legitimate, Ian filing date notarization. "You built this without investors?" I asked. "Sold my gear, used the refund from the canceled sponsors." His voice was steady now. "I'm not asking for money, Dad. I just thought you should know I'm doing something that's mine." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The furnace kicked on, the sound low and rhythmic. "You said once that revenge isn't loud," he said finally. "You were right. Fixing things quietly is harder than destroying them publicly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. An old flash drive, the one shaped like a key, the same kind I'd used to store my father's voice memos. He placed it on the table. "You left this at my place years ago." I found it in a box. I listened to it. Granddad said something I didn't understand until now. Pride without proof is performance. I thought about that for weeks. He paused. "You had proof. I only had pride." The air between us felt heavy, not hostile, just full of everything we'd never said. I took the flash drive, turned it over in my hand, the metal cold and familiar. "You can keep it," I said finally. "Those words belong to whoever needs them most." He nodded, eyes lowering slightly. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him as the boy who used to ask endless questions, not the man who'd tried to turn his father into content. When he left, he didn't hug me, and I didn't expect him to. Some reconciliations don't need touch. They just need restraint. He stopped at the door and said, "I won't use the family name again unless it means something good." I replied, "Then make it mean something real." He smiled, small, uncertain, and walked out into the cold. The sound of the door closing wasn't final. It was just clean. After he left, I went to the office and opened the window. The air bit at my face, sharp and clean. Across the yard, the light from the neighboring houses glowed faintly in the mist. I thought about my father again, about the way he used to stand at this same window, hands behind his back, watching the world as if auditing it. Maybe all men in our line were accountants of silence, balancing ledgers no one else could see. That evening, I found myself replaying a recording from one of the old drives. My father's voice, grainy but strong. "Don't mistake distance for disrespect. Sometimes it's just maintenance." I shut the player off halfway through and sat there in the dark. Maintenance, that was exactly what this was. Repair, upkeep, boundary. Not hatred, not grief. Just maintenance of dignity. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a check for $47,000, the exact amount of the loan, with a memo line that said, "For everything borrowed." I stared at it for a long moment, then set it under the desk lamp. The light caught the ink, making it shimmer like something alive. I didn't deposit it, not yet. Some debts aren't about money. They're about acknowledgement. I placed the check inside a new folder labeled Closure, Personal. Then I wrote a note on a yellow sticky pad. Record of reconciliation, December 18th. I stuck it to the front. Organization was how I prayed. That night, the town held its annual Christmas lighting downtown. I hadn't gone in years, but I drove there anyway, parked at the edge of the square and stood among strangers watching the strings of bulbs flicker on one by one. The crowd clapped softly. Kids screamed. Someone played carols on a cheap speaker. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was alignment. The simple relief of things turning on when they should. A man in the crowd bumped my shoulder and apologized. I turned to say it was fine, and for a split second I saw a profile that looked like Michael's. I almost called his name, but it wasn't him. Just another young man carrying a camera, filming the lights for a project that would vanish into the sea of uploads by morning. I smiled, not with bitterness but understanding. Everyone's chasing proof. When I got home, the house was dark except for the lamp over the desk. I poured tea, sat down, and opened my ledger one last time. On the final line of the final page, I wrote, "Accounts balanced." Then I closed it, placed it on the shelf, and let the silence of the house fold over me like a familiar coat. Outside, the snow began again, thin, slow, deliberate. It covered the walkway, the steps, the marks of his last visit. And for the first time in years, I let it. No need to sweep, no need to document. Some things are meant to be buried by time, not paper. Winter settled hard after Christmas. By January, the trees stood naked against the white sky, the street lamps humming like quiet sentinels. The house felt lighter now, like it had exhaled everything it had been holding for years. I'd cleared out the office, no folders on the desk, no stacks of paper, just the laptop and the old photo of my father with his arm around me, taken outside the first hardware store. His expression was half pride, half warning, like he knew I'd one day need to relearn everything he'd already understood. Most days I walked into town. I'd stop by the diner where Michael and I last met, sit at the same booth, order coffee, and leave before finishing it. Routine is a kind of faith. It keeps you from reopening wounds by replacing them with repetition. The waitress started recognizing me, stopped asking if anyone was joining. That small silence was its own kindness. One morning I found an envelope slid under my front door. No return address again. Inside, a photograph. Not printed from a phone, but developed. Matte paper, edges soft. It was of Michael at a community center, standing beside a group of older men and women holding certificates. The banner behind them read Media Repair Initiative, Restoring Trust in Storytelling. At the bottom, someone had scrawled in pen, "He's teaching others how to rebuild reputations the right way." I turned it over. No message, no name, just proof. Quiet, concrete, complete. I smiled, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed to. That afternoon I drove to the river again, the same spot where I'd once sat in silence after everything broke. The water was frozen this time, pale sunlight skipping across its glass surface. I parked, rolled down the window, and let the cold bite my hands. I thought about legacy, how people imagine it's a monument, but it's really a maintenance schedule. You keep showing up. You fix what cracks. You don't build to be admired. You build to withstand weather. I pulled out the yellow notepad I kept for reflections and wrote slowly. January 7th. Reconciliation doesn't need witnesses. Some apologies belong only to silence. I closed it, set it on the passenger seat, and watched a hawk circle overhead, weightless, unbothered by the cold. When I got home, I didn't go to the office. I went straight to the living room, where the old family albums sat stacked by the fireplace. I opened one for the first time in years. There were pictures of birthdays, camping trips, ordinary dinners, proof that before betrayal, we were just people trying our best. I took a photo of one page and sent it to his number with 2 words, "Keep building." No reply came, and I didn't expect one. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, I started volunteering at the local vocational school, teaching budgeting, contracts, basic record keeping. Young men with restless eyes and too many half-finished plans sat in front of me, eager, impatient. I saw parts of Michael in every one of them, the same hunger to be seen, the same terror of being ordinary. I taught them what my father taught me. Paper remembers. Words don't. They laughed at first, then listened. By the end of the semester, one of them asked, "Mr. Thompson, is it true you built a company from nothing?" I smiled. "It's true," I said. "But what matters more is that I rebuilt myself when it fell apart." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you someone heard something they'll carry for a long time. That night I walked home under a low, heavy sky. Snow began again, soft, forgiving, endless. I stood on the porch watching it erase the street, the cars, the footprints. Everything covered, everything reset. Inside, the heater hummed and the old clock ticked toward midnight. I poured a cup of tea, sat in my father's chair, and let the stillness surround me. I thought about how easily humiliation turns to wisdom if you stay still long enough to document it. About how revenge, once finished, stops feeling like fire and starts feeling like clean air. About how every man eventually becomes his own record keeper, responsible for maintaining the truth when no one else will. I looked out at the snow one last time and said quietly, "Accounts balanced." Then I closed my eyes, not with regret, but with calm acceptance that everything had found its proper column. Now tell me, if your own son, or someone you loved, turned your name into their stage, would you expose them to the truth like I did? Or would you stay silent and hope they learned on their own?